The reason he backed off on Epstein was because he was told that Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence. So February 2020, you have Cindy McCain, John McCain's wife, coming out and say, we all knew what Epstein was doing, and operate like that and abuse thousands of girls and get away with all of this stuff if you don't have someone behind you, right?
So this is just a kid.
Got you turned on about wanting to learn about what's going on with Epstein?
Well, it was actually when Alex Acosta, who was Secretary of Labor under Trump, he was quoted by Vicky Ward and some other people as saying that the reason he backed off on Epstein was because he was told that Epstein, quote, belonged to intelligence. So I originally wasn't planning to write about the case because I tend to focus more on underreported stories, and there was a lot of buzz around Epstein after his arrest at that time. But once the intelligence angle came up, it was kind of like, well, I'd like to see, where that leads, because even when that acknowledgement came out, there wasn't a lot of interest, at least it seemed to me anyway, in mainstream media, and getting really to the bottom of what that means, that he belonged to intelligence. A lot of things, right? It could he could either have been an intelligence asset, he could have been, an agent, and also, which intelligence agency are we talking about, right? So it was kind of an open question, but once you get that type of acknowledgement about someone as controversial as Epstein, a lot of things start to move to sort of protect the people who would have been his handlers in that situation.
When did you first hear his name, and when did the general population out there start hearing his name? Because I don't think I heard his name until 2018, 19. My numbers right? When did you hear?
2019 was the arrest, and I'd heard of him, before, because he was arrested, previously in around 2006, 2007. So his name was around because, even then people knew of the association with people like Bill Clinton and Trump and a lot of, very powerful and influential people.
He's been talked about for a while.
It's
not a new thing.
But the focus was a lot more extensive.
Yeah,
in 2019,
of course, absolutely.
For sure.
The average person hearing Epstein's name is in the last handful of years.
Couple of years.
So
absolutely,
that's a good question right there. So maybe from this perspective, what does the average person, in your eyes, since you've been doing a lot of due diligence and research on this, what does the average person think they know about Epstein? And maybe we can get into what are some things we don't know that we should definitely know.
All right, so as far as I see it, the narrative about Jeffrey Epstein that I think most people have absorbed because it's been the mainstream media coverage, they focus pretty specifically on what he was doing from 2000 to about 2006 or so, and only on the sex crimes. And beyond that, maybe a handful of outlets have talked about things maybe in the 90s, maybe things after his first arrest, what he did between that time and his second arrest. But really beyond that, it's a very narrow focus, in my opinion, because this is a guy that really entered, the workforce, I guess you could say, sometime in the 70s. And he was, visiting the Clinton White House in the 90s, and there's been very little interest, especially in American mainstream media, and talking about that particular period of time in Jeffrey Epstein's career. Actually, like UK media outlets like the Daily Mail and outlets like that have been much more focused on those aspects of the Epstein case than American mainstream media, and that's pretty telling because, Bill Clinton's an former American president, not a former British prime minister, so why the lack of focus? The Daily Beast has also talked a little bit about that, but as far as I know, that's, pretty much it. So particular trip that I note in the book. But after that, he, went to the Dalton School, which I think some people that looked into the case, after his second arrest are probably familiar with, because the man that hired him there, who is the headmaster of Dalton at the time, was William Barr's father, Donald Barr. And
Bill Barr, as in the former...
the two-time Attorney General. Yes, right. And his father was a former... a veteran of the Office of Strategic Services, which is a precursor to the CIA. And then he went to Columbia and was sort of a talent scout, I guess, in a sense, because he ran a lot of programs at Columbia focusing on talented high schoolers. And it's very possible that Epstein was a very gifted high schooler in the New York area. He graduated high school very young. He went to the Interlochen Academy of Arts and was a very talented teenager. So it's very possible he may have met Donald Barr that way. But Donald Barr, for whatever reason, hires him to go to the Dalton School, and according to former students quoted by the New York Times, he showed a weird interest in partying with underage kids even then, and wanted to drink, and some claim they hit on him and all this stuff. And other people said that was normal at the Dalton School and all of that. And the reason for him leaving isn't quite clear, but he was sort of headhunted there by Alan Greenberg of Bear Stearns. and went and joined that particular bank. And Alan Greenberg, just a couple years after he brought Epstein into Bear Stearns, became the head of Bear Stearns. So Epstein was sort of, from what I understand, his mentor was basically Greenberg, and Greenberg goes to the top of the bank, and so obviously that helps Epstein's career. He, climbs the ladder pretty rapidly there, and then starts working with some of their elite clientele, the identities of which we don't exactly know, but based on the circumstances under which he left, it was related to an SEC investigation focusing on insider trading of the Bronfman family company, Seagram's, I believe. Yeah, so it seems like Edgar Bronfman, he may have been involved in advising him on some things, and what he was apparently well known for and talented in at Bear Stearns was advising people about tax law. So there may have been some sort of tax evasion stuff or something. I mean, he left under rather murky circumstances, and there's a lot of, differing opinions coming out of there. But in looking at the particular Seagram's insider trading stuff, and that the SEC was tipped off that Epstein knew something about it, and Epstein leaves, so there's no blowback for the bank because at this point, right, his mentor is the head of the bank. That could obviously have impacts all the way up at Bear Stearns, right? And another thing that's interesting is just a couple around that same time, the person who had been the legal counsel for Bear Stearns most of the time that Epstein was working for that bank became CIA director under Reagan, Bill Casey.
So these links, by the way, if you go on Donald Barr, because we went through that very quickly. Bill Barr's father, Donald Barr. Okay, so that's Donald Barr. When he was at Dalton, just to kind of put into perspective for the audience, how big of a deal is the school, Dalton?
Well, from what I understand, it's kind of one of, I'm not from New York City and I've never been there. So, I don't have like an insider understanding necessarily of that. But from what I understand, a lot of, elite wealthy people
went to the school,
send their children there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when he hired Epstein to become a professor teaching mathematics, this is a guy that's never had a degree before, right? Like Epstein never got a degree.
No, he would have not been eligible, as I understand it, to even teach in public school in New York.
How does that make any sense for him to get a job teaching even though he's never had a degree before?
Right. So Donald Barr apparently hired unconventional teachers and was known for this, right? But he actually left by the time Epstein started. Hiring decisions were apparently made in the spring. And that summer, Donald Barr left after having made those hiring decisions. So during most of Epstein's time there, it was another headmaster. And from what I understand, Donald Barr's him leaving the Dalton School was rather acrimonious. Like he was sort of forced out, it seems, by angry parents and some angry teachers.
Published a science fiction novel that contained several prominent references to and descriptions of rape and sexual slavery.
Sex slavery, that's true. And that was published shortly after he left the Dalton School. So there's a weird mix here, right? But, you can't make any direct connection necessarily, but given everything else we're talking about Epstein, intelligence, the sex crimes, all of that, it starts to look kind of, weird, this far back. But, obviously over time it gets